Hello, my name is Pikiss-Chris,
And I am Bastard Swordsman.
and this is Scenes from a podcast where two dudes sit around and talk about movies.
Yeah, it's called Scenes from a Podcast because it's a reference to the Ingmar Bergman movie, Scenes from a Marriage. But obviously, this is a podcast, and, you know, movies have scenes. So, which
Just like
we're going to be,
marriages.
yeah, that's very true. And we're talking about movies, so we're going to be seeing a lot of scenes. And yeah.
It's a very clever play on words, if I do say so myself. I am chewing garlic bread right now.
Any good?
Oh, yeah, it's wonderful.
I bet. So basically, what we're going to do every episode is we take turns recommending a movie and then we end up talking about it. But before that, before we get into the movie, we decided on this time, I want to ask Pikiss-Chris here, have you been playing any games or watching any other like cool shows or anything?
Yeah. Recently, I got my hands on the original GameCube version of Metroid Prime because I needed a palate cleanser after playing Other M. You know,
Yeah, I get that.
I was just playing it just to see is there anything I actually like about this game? You know, because
Have you played it before?
Other M.
Yeah. No. Oh. You were talking about
Yeah.
you pre-played Other M. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Because everyone rags on the story and character assassination of Samus, but
The gameplay also looks pretty lame from what I've seen.
yeah, well, more so the level design than the gameplay. Almost called it lame play.
So true, Oomphy.
Yeah. But yeah, Prime has significantly better level design overall. It also has better art direction, just it's like at least 20 years old or close to it, and it looks like so much better than Other M in terms of the sort of grungy alien sort of exotic techno aesthetics that it has. So
I've always been meaning to play Metroid Prime, but I never had a GameCube, unfortunately.
yeah.
So yeah. The music also is really good in Metroid Prime, though. I've heard some of the music from the soundtrack.
Yeah.
So recently, I was reading a manga called Liar Game, and I actually finished it yesterday. And so basically, the concept is this high school girl gets this letter in the mail along with a package saying that in the package there's 100 million yen, which is the equivalent to $1 million, and if she opens the package, she will be now participating in a tournament known as the Liar Game. And she's like, what? No way. This sounds like an elaborate prank. But, out of curiosity's sake, she opens the package anyway. And what do you know? Yeah, it's a briefcase with 100 million yen. And yeah. And basically, it's like a tournament with different types of games where she has to compete for money against other people. But she's like really naive and like especially really stupid in the beginning stages of the manga, and it was really aggravating at those points. And she also teams up with a dude who's like an ex-con but with a heart of gold basically. And yeah. And so I finished the manga, and it had some pretty all right points. It had some kind of cool games. There was a game of musical chairs, which is actually more interesting than it sounds. But the ending was really lame, and it felt very sloppily put together. And the payoff and the reasoning for why the Liar Game tournament was made in the first place, it's a very unsatisfying reveal. And honestly, the final page barely feels like an ending. But yeah, I'd give it like a 4 out of 10. It had its all right moments, but in the end, it was pretty lame. More like Liar Lame.
Yeah. So it's like, would you say it's like a guilty pleasure sort of thing for you? Like, it's not good, but you enjoyed it sort of thing? Or
No, not really. I'd say it was just like it. I actually went into it with somewhat high-ish expectations because it's from the writer of another series that I saw the anime for called One Outs, which is about gambling and baseball. But that was actually kind of a cool series. At least the anime was, but the anime didn't adapt all the manga. But it's more like Liar Game had some sort of interesting games and premises. But then it just got like gradually more boring towards the end, and it just like fizzled out. And yeah,
yeah. I mean, I haven't read it myself, but big pet peeve of mine is when it comes to writing anyway is protagonists who are like written dumb just because they're meant to be
yeah,
like a surrogate for the audience. Like, well, we can't have them being competent because
yeah,
the reader isn't competent or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the character does kind of grow, and like in some sense, but yeah. There's also one of the other characters that's like a reoccurring character, like has a fascination with Hitler. And that was kind of funny. He idolizes Hitler, and he's like an antagonist.
He idolizes Hitler.
Yeah. They make sure to say that he wasn't a fan of his latter years, um, but he like basically idolizes how he was able to control a massive amount of people and nearly control all of Europe, and how he was a great dictator and all that.
It's appropriate that we're talking about this while on a Discord server.
So true. Yeah. Um, yeah. So you want to get into the film?
Yeah, yeah. If either of us sound tired, I just want to preface this by saying that we technically already did this first episode, but
It's a re-recorded.
I fucked it up. So yeah. So we're basically just pretending that this is a conversation we haven't had before. So
Well, anymore.
yeah. So
Yeah. Hopefully, future episodes will be more fresh for us. But yeah. So for our first film, oh sorry. Do you mind if I introduce the film yet, or do you have anything more to say?
yeah, no, it was your choice. You were the one who chose this film, so it's
Mm. Yeah. This was, well, it's Chris's podcast, but he let me choose the film. And like, we both kind of agreed, but it was really my recommendation mostly. So, my film recommendation was from 1997, a Japanese film directed by Takeshi Kitano called Hana-bi. And basically, the premise of the film is there's this sort of retired cop who has a wife terminally ill with leukemia, and it sort of follows him, her, and his some of the other guys from the force, and also the yakuza, who the main character Nishi owns or owes money to. And yeah, and so what did you think of the film?
I thought that I thought it was good, you know. I wanted to start out with like a little more like analysis, but I feel like I should preface it off the. It's a very well made movie.
Yeah,
Um, you know, just in terms of the fact that it's like a gangster film, or like to us it would be a gangster film, sort of a
yeah,
crime drama sort of genre film, but it doesn't like follow a lot of like the directorial conventions that those films follow. You know,
yeah,
there are moments in it that are actually very tranquil, very quiet, and
yeah,
you know, it's not like quiet in like a Godfather sort of way where it's like it's more so like the characters, there's very little focus, I think, except for like the middle of the film on like the criminal element. It's more so about people like adjusting to the effect it's had on them in their everyday life. If I could like I think that's what I'm trying to get at there. You know, it
that's a good
yeah,
analysis of it.
yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of tranquil scenes. The film is sort of like quietly beautiful in a way, even though there are some scenes with some rough violence here and there. And that's kind of a trademark of a lot of Kitano's movies. They're very sort of deadpan and also tranquil for the most part, but with like flashes of spontaneous violence. And a lot of his movies are sort of crime dramas focusing either on police or the Yakuza. And it's interesting because Kitano didn't start off as a director. He was known for being a comedian before. In fact, today he's known as one of the three big comedians in Japan, and he went under the pseudonym of Beat Takeshi. Uh, and he's also worked as a TV host, a game show host. He even made a really awful video game, Takeshi's Challenge.
What are you talking about? That's like to video games what Schindler's List is to cinema.
So true. Um, if you know the video game magazine Famitsu, they have a section in the magazine for kusoge, which literally means shit game. And back when Takeshi's Challenge came out, they gave it their like monthly kusoge award as like the worst game of that month or whatever.
Yeah. But you just don't get it. It's not a game script. It's a movie script, you know? They're divorce your wife to go treasure hunting.
First cinematic video game experience. Uh, but
Anyways, yeah. I can't say I'm as familiar with Takeshi's filmography or just like artistic accomplishments in general as Swordsman is. He's he's not just like a weeb who's like super into Japanese stuff, but he's also just generally more educated about film history and film directors and whatnot. You know, I consider myself more of like a casual fan of film, despite my ambitions.
Yeah, I kind of watch an unhealthy amount of movies,
Yeah.
but yeah. Speaking of Kitano's um role in comedy, there are some sort of like comedic elements to the film, even though it's not really a comedy at all, but just I think a lot of the comedic elements seep through Kitano's character Nishi and how he's this very deadpan guy who goes around and punches people.
I mean, yeah, I it comes off as very subdued in the moment, like not just in like the presentation of like the violence. Like I think it is intentional, but I also think it's not purely played for comedy. It's like half and half. Like
Yeah.
it's meant to like sort of showcase that like this is a guy who's a little rough around the edges. He's a little desensitized to the idea of violence. And so like there are multiple I'm going to put up a spoiler warning here just
Oh
because
yes. Spoilers. We are spoiling this whole movie.
yeah.
So watch it if you haven't.
Yeah. Uh in fact, watch all the movies that we will talk about on this podcast unless they suck, but
Yeah.
uh but there are multiple points in the film where it's like he's threatened by the yakuza and he just sort of very nonchalantly dispatches of them, you know, not even like killing them, but mostly just like severely injuring them or whatever. I think there's like one of the first scenes where they like come up to him like demanding his money. Like he just sort of like in view in front of everyone at like a bar or a diner. He just sort of stabs them in the eye with like his chopsticks and then just walks away. And it's like there are no quick cuts either. It's like you see it all happening and it sort of emphasizes just how nonchalant he is about the idea of like because to him it's not like violence, it barely even registers as self-defense.
Well, I I would say it's more violence, and he actually intentionally is trying to strike fear into them so that they don't mess with him again because he just wants to be left alone by them.
Yeah. I yeah, it's a very like thought I had a point there. uh it's Nishi is a very interesting character too because it's like for the most part he's very quiet and he almost comes off as like not exactly shy but not exactly like very
Social,
outgoing,
sociable.
not very social. Yeah, he
He doesn't say a single word for like the first 20 minutes of the movie, I'm pretty sure.
yeah, I think the only time I ever remember him actually saying anything is like a scene very late into the movie when he's just being very casually alone with his wife. They're just sort of spending their last few days together on vacation. And it
Yeah, because his
was,
wife's about to die.
yeah, it was the scene where they're like in the car and he's trying to guess what sort of card she's holding up and he's sort of jokingly cheating at the game by
Scene's great.
looking through the rear view mirror. It's
Yeah. And then she like makes it literally impossible for him to guess.
yeah, I
It,
like that scene too. It's one of the few times in the movie where it's like I think it humanizes him a little bit because if he was just like this silent badass who ain't afraid of nothing and who fights what good all the time, he'd be a very shallow character. But you do see there's this sort of like more human outgoing side to him when he's with someone
He's
that he's actually like invested in.
oh yeah, well he's definitely very human, and he will laugh and almost like there are a couple scenes. One I'll get to later, where like he almost is on the verge of tears, and then of course there's another scene where he legitimately gets pissed off at someone in a very um, personal way because one of the members of the force um, was shot by a guy and then he was crippled, and he's one of the other big characters of the film. I think his name was Horibe.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. It was Horibe.
Yeah.
Definitely had a prominent H sound in the name.
Yeah. And another notable thing about the film is that there's not a lot of crazy camera work, uh, with maybe like one exception. There's this one shot where Nishi kills the Yakuza in the car, and then he gets out of the car, and it's like an overhead shot, and it's like it follows him like overhead while he's walking across the snow. That was kind of a weird shot. But most of it is just like very static camera work, and it really sets the atmosphere very well. Sort of a very basic atmosphere, and I feel it reflects the situations of a lot of the characters because they sort of feel trapped in their own situations. Like Nishi owes money to the Yakuza, and also he wants to spend time with his wife, who isn't going to be around for much longer, and also his wife is obviously feels trapped and she can't do anything because she has terminal leukemia. And Horibe is obviously trapped because he's crippled from the waist down. He needs to be in a wheelchair. And yeah. And that sort of style is present in a lot of his films. But another thing that sticks out to me is the editing, because there are some situations where it's like a quick cut where there's a scene early on where Nishi lights a cigarette, and the second he hits the lighter, it cuts to a gunshot, which is a scene that's actually takes place before. It's a flashback, but you don't really know that, and it shows Horibe getting shot.
Yeah, it's
And
I think that's one of the only examples of like a quick cut in the whole movie. Yeah, a lot of it really is just sort of like still shots of the characters in frame, whether that be like a medium shot or a wide shot showing the landscape. It's more so about showing them in their environment and sort of the subtle gestures and facial expressions.
yeah, one of the things that I did notice is that most of the instances with the quick cuts are when Nishi is reminiscing, and it sort of shows the visceral trauma of some of the past events, like the guy who shot Horibe and also killed another cop that then Nishi ended up killing in revenge. And it's definitely something that is tormenting him even in the present day of the film. Another thing I wanted to touch on is the theme of family in the film, because Nishi and his wife, it's only mentioned once in the film, but they had a daughter who passed away. I don't remember if it was mentioned how, but he did have a dead daughter, and there are scenes when he comes home and there are symbols of like children one day he comes home and there's a small like child's scooter in the hallway that he just pushes aside, and then another time he comes home and there's a child's shoes, and it sort of reminds him of his own kid that he used to have.
And I think it's also a good parallel to Horibe's uh,
Yeah.
sort of situation where it's like it's a very similar pain, but under very different circumstances. Nietzsche's it's sort of like his family members are either dying or dead, and he's going to be left alone soon,
Oh yeah.
and he's sort of like trying to spend as much time as he can get with his wife before he loses her. And with Horibe, it's like the moment he was crippled,
His family left him.
yeah, they saw him as like a burden, and now he's like trying to find like sort of meaning and purpose outside of relationships. So
Which is why he takes up painting.
yeah, I think it's like a very interesting parallel. It's like Nishi, he's sort of like trying to like keep his sense of self and purpose through like his being there emotionally for his wife and this time they spend together, and Horibe's sort of is about like sort of expressing his pain through art and paintings. That's another thing about the film. There's a lot of paintings in the background that act as sort of like motifs or as like symbolism for what's going on in a particular scene.
Yeah.
I, sorry.
The interesting thing is that those were all painted by the director himself, Takeshi Kitano.
Man of
'Cause
many talents.
definitely, because a few years before this film came out, he was in a motorcycle accident which nearly killed him and left part of his face paralyzed. And after that, he fell into a deep depression, and he ended up taking up painting. And it's difficult not to see that accident and its aftermath sort of reflected in this film, because it was a near-death experience for him, and life and death definitely play a big part in this movie, like whether it be literal or figurative.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I feel like this is a very no shit Sherlock thing to say, but I do feel like there's a parallel between the director's experience and Horibe's experience of, you know, this traumatic thing happened to me and I have to express myself through art.
Yeah.
You know?
A lot of the big emotionally resonant
Sorry, you cut out
films
there.
obviously tend to draw upon real experiences from the writer or director.
Yeah.
And this film definitely is emotionally resonant, in my opinion. And aside just from the story itself, I think one of the aspects that's able to convey the emotions of the film so well would definitely be the soundtrack, which is honestly just beautiful.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like what you'd think like a crime drama soundtrack would sound like. It sounds more
It's
like
not
a
like
very
it's not like Martin Scorsese stuff where it's like playing Rolling Stones or like, really upbeat or kind of like cool music. It's just very like beautiful, whimsical at points, and even kind of sad at other points.
I think the first time we recorded this, you said the guy who did this soundtrack sort of worked on a lot of Ghibli films. Yeah.
Yeah, the composer's name is Hisaishi, I believe, is how you pronounce it, Hisaishi. And he did compose the soundtracks to a lot of Hayao Miyazaki movies like uh, Spirited Away and Princess Mononoke and stuff like that.
which I
and
found
he's definitely
interesting. Sorry, I didn't mean to
no.
interrupt you.
You continue.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's like both those films and this film. The music is very whimsical and very almost sweeping adventure like in a way, at least in the form of the main leitmotif. But they both have very different feels to them.
Yeah. Well, this is a very different film from
Yeah.
your average Miyazaki movie. It's a lot darker and, well, obviously more adult.
Yeah. I was just saying that he's got the range, in terms of like emotion and tone and
Definitely.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, the film is really emotional at points, but it does have some whimsical moments, like when he meets that junk yard guy.
My favorite character in the movie.
Yeah, like Nishi just shows up and he wants to buy like a cop light for, you know, to put on top of a car, and the junkyard guy is like, "What for?" And Nishi's just like, "I'm gonna rob a bank," and he's like, "All right, you can have it."
Yeah, I say it sort of half jokingly, but he really is a very interesting character, the junker guy, because it's like he's very the first time you see him, he's being yelled at by an old man whose car he like crashed into on like a narrow road, and he like intimidates him into like leaving him alone, and then crashes into his car some more.
Yeah,
And then the second scene we see him in is that scene. And then there's a third scene where like another character comes up to him, this sort of delinquent character, and he's trying to do like a very similar thing to like what Nishi's trying to do. He's trying to sort of purchase something so that he can pretend to be like
see,
a cab driver, but because he won't come out and say it, the guy doesn't like sell it to him and like rats him out to the cops. It's a very subtle moment of characterization where
he
where
like he treats people based on how much he respects them, obviously,
yeah.
and based on how real he believes they are.
He's just like the one flaw of the movie is there weren't more scenes with that man because he's like certified sigma male.
Absolutely true. And the scene where Nishi actually robs the bank is really great because, like, it's not like a bombastic scene at all. He just comes in, he puts the bag, kind of, sort of like waves his gun, but not like a crazy man, sort of in a way where only the teller in front of him can see, and not a single word is spoken. Everything is communicated through actions, and it's still a really tense scene. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um.
it is. There's gonna be a lot of pauses I can hopefully edit out here. Otherwise, I'll add in a fart sound. I don't know to keep that from being too
No,
awkward.
I think you should just edit them out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, one interesting thing about the film is that it definitely explores the fragility and beauty of life, but it is also quite dark. It doesn't shy away from the darker points of life. Um, because at the end of the film, Nishi is on the run from the cops because they ended up finding out that he killed the Yakuza members, and instead of going to jail and leaving his wife on her own, who would definitely have died while he was in prison, he decides to commit like a murder suicide, which is a really dark way to end the film.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, especially because it's like during the moment he's sort of the last few minutes of the film are him basically hallucinating that his daughter's alive and that he and his
Yeah,
wife
and
are on the
the
beach, sort of helping her
little
find.
girl on the beach that's implied to be his dead daughter.
Yeah, it's it's a it's like there's you sort of know it doesn't have to be explained to you that she's like an imaginary being because like we've spent the whole film with him just him and his wife, so it's like you sort of get that this is him sort of having one last sort of fantasy before they sort of double suicide each other.
Yeah, and like the greenery becomes more visible and the sky is a brighter shade of blue once the little fantasy begins, which are like other external clues that it's just an imaginary event because it's a very in reality, it's like snowing and cold and stuff, so that's another cue.
Yeah.
And yeah, he did kill himself and his wife because at the beginning of the scene, you can see him loading two bullets into the chamber, and there are three cops there, and we only hear two gunshots at the end. So, yeah, and
It's very nice sort of visual storytelling.
yeah,
Yeah, it.
doesn't need to be spelled out necessarily.
Yeah. I also like that the final shot of the film is just the wife, no, not the wife, the daughter looking at them as they die, because it's like she's imaginary. So so it's like is he like imagining that like he sort of scarred her and her, reaction's very subdued and all that. So it's a nice little thing that that's sort of the last thing he would think about before he goes.
Yeah, he's like thinking of his daughter in the end, and definitely probably like thinking of it in a religious sense. He might be thinking he'll see her in the afterlife, and the final shot focusing on the daughter definitely associates like death with that scene because she's dead and now they're dead, and in a very dark sense they're finally together in the end. But yeah, although contrasting Nishi, or in contrast, as opposed to Nishi, Horibei's little arc with the paintings ends in a very different way because he ends up considering suicide but doesn't go through with it and instead is able to vent his pain in a somewhat healthier way through his art. Like he labels that one painting just suicide, and that's sort of, how he was able to get that pain out
Yeah.
as opposed to actually killing himself.
I also like how it's like a painting of like a snowy landscape because it sort of parallels the sort of
Place that
mountain,
Nishi.
yeah, that he and his wife are vacationing in. And I also like how the scene that follows that. All right, so it's very cleverly set up where it's like we've been establishing that he's been painting throughout the whole film, and then we don't see anything. We don't see him in the shot when we see like that painting. We just see it sort of zooming out to show the word suicide splattered over it. So it's like, oh shit, did he kill himself? And it's like then we have like this scene where basically Nietzsche is called in by the Yakuza one last time and just sort of effortlessly kills them all. And only after that do we come back and do we see that it's just Horibe's still alive, and there's this little addendum to it where he like spills sort
Red
of red
paint.
on it. Yeah, sort of like almost like he's rejecting what he was about to do.
Yeah.
But it also parallels what Nietzsche's done for himself, because by leaving those bodies there, he sort of sealed his fate by like letting the cops sort of have evidence against him, which leads to that whole ending we were talking about.
Yeah, it also serves as a bit of foreshadowing because um, when Nishi points the gun at the last guy and it goes click, it instantly cuts to the to Horibe splashing the red paint on it, saying suicide, which foreshadows that Nishi ends up killing himself with a gun, and also that him killing the Yakuza is sort of the beginning of his suicide because it puts him in a situation that he can't get out of.
It's probably like, I know it's at the very end of the movie, but I think it's one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie, just that whole sequence, because it's like, in a way, it sort of reminds you that it's just as much Horibe's story as it is Nietzsche's story.
Yeah.
And sort of like one sort of, despite not having any like human connection left in his life, sort of finds a reason to keep going, whereas the character who does have that, at the very least, sort of not intentionally and not maliciously, but he sort of squanders it.
Yeah. I think that's definitely a big part of the film's message, like being in situations where you've experienced unreversible trauma and still afterwards trying to find some sort of beauty in your life, even if you know that eventually you might experience more loss, still, searching for beauty in spite of that. And I think despite how dark the film gets, it is a sort of nice message.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not like glorifying Nishi's actions. Yeah.
He
Anything?
really,
What?
I was just going to add on to that statement. It's like there's enough sympathetic traits to the character where it's like you can, I guess, admire him from a distance, but it's also like clear that like he sort of did sort of bury himself in the end.
Yeah. Like he's like he obviously has sympathy towards other people like Horibe and to the wife of a former colleague of his who was murdered in the line of duty. Because he tries to do things for her to make it up for the fact that her husband got killed, and he might, feel some blame for that occurrence.
Yeah. I think it also helps that like the only people we really see him brutalizing throughout the film
Or the Yakuza.
are the Yakuza, yeah. Uh it's it's definitely like, that's definitely more of like a storytelling technique to keep him like more sympathetic, you know?
Yeah.
But it
But
also makes it clear that like if he was really like a good person, like he wouldn't have gotten involved with them in the first place, I guess.
yeah, it's really easy to make a character likable just by only giving them positive attributes, and it's also easy to make a character really unlikable by only giving them like very negative or evil traits. But it's really hard to pull off a likable character who has a lot of flaws.
Yeah.
But I think it was pulled off very well here. One little thing I want to add that I find funny is that A lot of Takeshi Kitano's characters are very stone faced and stoic and always like beating people up and stuff. But as a comedian, he was in a comedy duo and he played the funny man while his partner played the straight man, which I think is kind of interesting after seeing a lot of his films.
He definitely does have like a very subdued sense of humor. You know,
Yeah.
it's very situational rather than like, I don't know, like Doug Walker or whatever. Right, give me a second. Yeah, I'm almost out of battery here, so want to give
Might
our
want to finish this up, I guess.
yeah, want to give our final thoughts. I feel like we've been talking for a good while
Yeah.
here.
So, what did you think of the film? What would you give the film if you were rating it from like a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10?
I don't usually like rating systems. I feel like they don't have enough nuance. But if I did use them, I'd probably give this film a 10 out of 10. It really doesn't have any like major flaws that I noticed or that I would like even care about because it's like the style and the themes, are just they're all spot on, and it
It's just a really tightly written film, and I don't really have any problems with it either. I think basically every scene works perfectly in the context of the film. Uh, I would also give it a 10, personally.
yeah.
It's probably one of my favorite films of all time. Like the first time I watched it, I gave an 8. I gave it an 8, but upon rewatch, I just loved everything about it.
Yeah, it is definitely one of those films that gets better the more you watch it. You notice more little
So,
subtle details and can really appreciate the way everything sort of fits together like narratively or thematically.
it does reward future viewings because there are some little subtle things you might miss with the chronology or just character motivations and stuff.
Yeah. So
Uh,
if you haven't seen this film already or if you haven't, heard of it, go watch it. Uh, get a physical copy of it because streaming sucks and I don't think you can even stream it anywhere to begin with. And
oh. Let me check real quick. You can actually legally watch the site, or sorry, you can actually legally watch the film on a few sites like Canopy if you sign up, or Tubi, which is free but with ads, or you could buy it on Amazon or YouTube. Yeah, we're not affiliated by any of those sites, but you can do that if you want.
I don't think we'll be getting sponsorships anytime soon. Not unless
No.
advertisers get really cool about, I don't know, jokes about Hitler.
Manscaped, please reach out to us. Anyway, so I think that's about it for Hana-bi.
Definitely a good film to start on, and I'll probably go out of my way to see more Takeshi's films in the future.
Uh, or I could recommend another one in the future, whatever
Yeah.
you want,
Yeah. You might be here to listen to us talk about it in the future, hypothetical viewer.
possibly.
Yeah.
But speaking of the future, uh, Chris has a film to recommend.
Yes. So next week, the two of us are going to be, well, not next week,
Well,
maybe.
well, yeah, 2 weeks, I think, from
Yeah.
when this episode will be uploaded.
2 weeks from now, we will be watching a obscure 2019 horror film called The Empty Man, which I think was based off of a short-lived graphic novel that it really doesn't have much to do with to begin with, but didn't really do well when it first came out. I saw it with some friends. We really liked it. We thought it was like one of the best horror films we've seen in a while, and hopefully, we'll be able to introduce it all to you come next episode. So stay tuned for that.
Great. Well, I mean, I'm looking it up and it does say it's from 2020, but if it's the film directed by David Pryor.
Ah, yeah, that's the one. You see, I was trying to be authentic to the original recording by keeping the exact same
And the
mistake I
flubs.
made in that one.
Uh,
I'm lying. I told
yeah,
myself I wasn't going to make that mistake again, and I did.
it's all right. Well, if you don't want to be spoiled on The Empty Man from 2020, directed by David Pryor, you should watch that before the next episode comes out because we will be talking about that next.
Goodbye, and hope it satisfies that itch in your brain.
All right, see you next time.